We're here at Unidad Park. So, Eliseo, introduce yourself and also tell us where we are.
Oh, I don't have to spell my name or say
Don't-
my name.
Yeah, say your
Okay.
name. So,
Okay.
so
Okay.
say your name,
Okay.
introduce us to where we are, and a little bit about your background.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Eliseo Art Silva. I'm the mural artist who painted the mural back behind us. I mean, when I say paint the mural, I didn't literally paint the whole thing myself. You know, I led the community in painting the whole wall for 8 months. But I designed it, and it's something that I did when I was in art school. I was 23 years old, and that's a little bit, just kind of like a background on the mural. But in terms of myself, I feel I have a connection with Bulosan because, like him, I came here at 17 years old. He was 17 when he came to the United States, and he identified with José Rizal as a way to find a solution to the problem, to face the problem that they confronted during his era. He gravitated towards Rizal. I have a similar experience. That's why Bulosan resonates to me a lot. When I first came here, I didn't want to be in America. It was my parents who wanted us to be here, and it was like a lot of pressure for all of us to come as a family because my parents don't want us to be separated and come back. For me to reunite later because they know that I'm not gonna eventually reunite with them. So it's kind of destiny that I had to come, and I tried to make use of it. And the first thing I did was I tried to find a connection between us Filipinos and America. So what I did, because I was homesick too, I went to the main library of Riverside. That's where we found a home, is in Riverside. At that time, Riverside was probably what Bulosan saw when he first came to the US. It's largely white, rural. It wasn't developed yet. There was a lot of farms. We were the first Asians in the neighborhood. So I did experience a lot of racism and discrimination. In fact, my dad was handcuffed on the second warning during the debut party of my sister. We haven't even we're not even like a resident in our house for 1 year, and when we had a party, we filled 300 cars, in the neighborhood, and my dad was handcuffed the night off. So even the cops were conniving with the neighbors and not following the law. Because usually what happened was in the first warning, they wouldn't do anything. They just give you a warning. The second one, after the third, is when they do something, right? But it was the first warning, so we put everything inside, including the speakers and the DJ. But then on the second warning, the cops came in and handcuffed my father, and that was like a big shock, especially. We were not even a year into our residency in America, and he was put to jail. For me, that was like very shocking and traumatic, and I know we were not welcome, in the neighborhood. So I went to the library and I found only less than 12 books about the Philippines, and most of them are books I've never seen before, especially the books on José Rizal. The books on José Rizal was published during the pre-war and was published by American authors and Europeans. It was mainly used during Rizal Day because I realized then that Rizal Day was a way for Filipinos in America to to have a stage with non-Filipinos. And they invite a lot of non-Filipinos with them during Rizal Day, which is December 30th, to convince them that Filipinos are not savages, that we are fit for self-government, that America should recognize our independence, because during the time we were still under U.S. rule. So Rizal was their weapon. They read his life, his works, and it was used as a weapon. So the books were used for that. So the books were much more radical than the books I read in the Philippines, right? So it changed my perspective about Rizal as being from a pacifist to actually a radical, an anarchist. And the book that really made it for me, that really brought me to tears and just it's like a game changer, was the book of Austin Coates called Philippine Nationalist and Martyr, and it's an original edition and it's right there in Riverside. It's from Oxford Publishing in England, and it's the first time Rizal became real for me, because the biography was very comprehensive and it was contextualized with what was happening during that time. It made Rizal come alive. Gandhi was mentioned because the author knew Gandhi. He was a government official of the British assigned in India, and Gandhi talked about Rizal as an influence. He even has a book in his library of Rizal, No Limitangere, in English, translated in English, in his own collection in India. So Rizal became a real person for me, and I realized that's how we could have a human face in the world, a Filipino face in America, and I think that's how Carlos Bulosan also saw it, and also that how Rizal used art to lift our stories and give it value and give it urgency and give it impact. It has to become art, so that we'll have a seat at the table. Those are the things that I realized after reading that book, that what he was really trying to fight for was that before we fight for physical independence and revolution, we have to tell the world what is it that we're offering to the world, so we deserve that seat at the table. And what that is the Philippine story. It's our story. That's why Bulosan wrote the story of Filipinos in America. He wrote his own story and made that art. See, that is the weapon. That is the weapon that he came up with, and that's how we could have value, acquire value in America. And if it reaches that level of art, which he was able to accomplish, it became a classic, right? It's the same with Rizal. Then we could achieve our goal. And art is the weapon. Art is the way to do it.
And for you, what is the role of Carlos Bulosan in the Filipino American community?
Well, like what I said, it's already documented in one of his essays or interviews. He wrote a letter. I think it's in a letter. It's one of those books I read that he said, "I'm trying to do what José Rizal did in the Philippines." So whatever. So he already said that he's trying to he's replicating his strategy and his vision, and he tried to nativize it, bringing it here. So the way I see it is that the incomplete, unfinished revolution in the Philippines was continued here in America. That's why the manifestation of an actual non-violent revolution happened here before People Power in 1986. It happened in the fields of Delano. They were able to bring Rizal's vision and prophecy of a non-violent revolution in September 8, 1965. That's actually the birthday of the Blessed Mother. It's their gift, to the Virgin Mary. So when 2,000 of them decided to strike, that was the first manifestation of Rizal's vision of a non-violent revolution by Filipinos, and it happened here. But it took another American to make it happen, and actually it's very coincidental because it's Americanization which removed the face of the Philippine flag. Originally our flag had a human face, right, in 1898, but it was erased during the Americanization period. So in a way, September 8, 1965 brought back the human face, humanized the Filipino identity in America. But it was when Cesar Chavez joined the Filipinos that it became solid. The manifestation became real. It became American. So then the Filipino face, was restored in America. So for me, what was this? Because we were connected, when the United States took over a republic, we were part of the United States. The motherland was America, so we were connected. But it had to happen here. It had to happen here. What I mean is that our reclaiming and restoration of our Philippinization movement, which is exactly what June 12, 1898 is. June 12, 1898 was the launching of the Philippinization of the Philippines, making the Philippines, you know, a country for Filipinos, by Filipinos, of Filipinos, and making us the main event and the protagonist of our own story. But you know, again, what is that story? The world has to know that story. That's why Rizal wrote Noli and Philly, and that's why Carlos Bulosan wrote whatever he wrote, you know, which is Americans in the Heart, along with other short stories, because it's our stories, really. Everything's about our stories. That's what makes us valuable. What makes us human. That's what makes us unique, because and that's what binds us together. Is our stories, our common stories. You know, we connect together as Filipinos, and other people connect with us through our story. So Bulosan continued what Rizal started, because he died early. He was only 35 years old, and you know the struggle continued here to Rizal Day. In fact, his poem is read in the U.S. Congress to justify Philippine independence. The Philippine Organic Act was passed only after Congressman Cooper of Wisconsin read in its entirety the English translation of Rizal's Ultimi Adios to justify that Filipinos are not savages and that we are fit for self-government. Right? So my only personal what do you call it? What I didn't like happen is that we chose to continue what the Americans did to damage our sense of self and identity, instead of continuing what they erased, which is June 12, 1898's legacy, and then rectifying what they damaged in terms of the narrative that they instituted in our educational system, because the educational system evolved into an Americanization of the Philippines, which means simply that the aim was to rid the Philippines of Filipinos. So it's defective as a nation building tool. We have to look back and try to find which parts of those are the most damaging in creating Filipinos, and then retain what we could use to advance our humanity and our civilization. We didn't do that. We didn't have a conscious effort of determining which one's anti-Filipino, which one's pro-American, and which was better for the whole country. We preserved whatever they gave us and went off with it, and so that essentially erased Filipinos from the Philippines, right? So there's more Filipinos here in a way in America because of the legacy of Carlos Bulosan, who continued what was discontinued in the Philippines from the Rizal that they knew, that their generation Bulosan knew, because when they left there, in the 20s, Rizal was still very much, his memory was still very much alive. It hasn't been contaminated as much. A lot of them, still belong to the generation that knew Rizal firsthand, and then by the time the next generation came along, it was a different version of the story. So Bulosan was able to preserve that and continue it here, and whatever they learned is already embodied in his writings.
So tell me a story about that image that you painted in the wall behind us, or behind you.
So my main
Positively No Filipinos Allowed.
Yeah, so when I did this mural, basically the idea I had was I have to focus on one event, and in that one event I need to take a stand, and I need to make a what do you call it, a way to rectify how they were erased from history. And the way I saw it was that they were not humanized or contextualized, because I could just imagine when the Filipinos, 2,000 Filipinos in the great fields of Delano, coming out into the public stage, will there be a work of art that automatically will appear in the imagination of the American public? Is there a work of art attached to us as Filipinos? I mean, if you look at if you have like 2,000 Chinese Americans in front of you, you automatically will have an image in art that will identify their story with, connect their story to us, right? Or the Japanese or Mexican Americans even with the Tres Grandes murals of Diego Rivera. I mean, it provides a identity that connects their stories to us, that makes them unique and human, and their stories come alive. With Filipinos, there isn't any. I don't think so. I mean, what would that work of art be? And as far as I in my own experience, the only thing I could think of is the door, the Positively No Filipinos door, which is the one I included in the mural next to Carlos Bulosan. And that image is not really telling a positive story about us. It's telling a story about how we were dismissed or objectified or minimized, right? But that image is the image that is the most powerful during that time. There isn't any work of art that will come out in their imagination, unlike the other cultures. That's probably, for me, that's the reason why the Filipinos were invisible. They were invisible because there's no identity. There's no identity because there's no work of art that appears in their mind. So that was my purpose in doing the mural. Everything behind the big heads and the grape strike is to contextualize and humanize the Filipino farm workers. And putting that big sun next to Philip Veracruz and Larry Itliong symbolizes that they were the first one to put a human face on the Philippine sun, to restore our identity as Filipinos. And then below them is Cesar Chavez. He's the only non-Filipino in the entire wall of 200 portraits, because he was the one who made it possible to make the strike victorious. By joining the Filipinos, we were able to make the movement succeed. And then, eventually it became a Mexican movement, but it started with Filipinos and with Carlos Bulosan laying the groundwork in terms of his narrative. Because you always need to have text for a revolution. It's the foundational text. Just like Rizal's Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo was the foundational text of the Philippine War of Independence. It emboldened Filipinos to unite, that we have a story to put at the seat of the table. We have a story that will earn us a seat at the table and offer something unique to the world. And that's because of Rizal elevating our story into art. And that's the same thing that Bulosan did with the Filipinos here. So he continued whatever we were unfinished in the Philippines here, and they were able to succeed. It was a triumph, right? Complete triumph. I mean, it's something that we never really embraced and celebrated, because we never really engaged with that history. It's a history that's been pushed aside, and we're trying to reclaim it. So by trying to revisit this history and try to reclaim it as our own history, then it becomes fresh and alive again, and it will serve its real purpose, which is to bind us as one, and for us to work together and achieve what they dreamt of. And that's where the gateway comes along. The gateway is the culmination of that, because in that gateway I put a sun of the flag, but there's a face there now. This mural doesn't have a face yet, but it's already trying to get there. But by the time 30 years later, after the mural is completed, there's a Filipino town, and now we have a gateway, and the gateway has a face of the Philippine sun, even though the Philippine flag doesn't have a face yet. But here in Filipino town in LA, we were able to do that, and it's symbolic because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put a human face, an identity to Filipinos in LA. That way, uh, we are valued. Our stories are valued. Our stories are Americanized, or at least know that it's equal to any American in this country, and we have to be taken seriously as part of America.
What's
And
the history of that positively Filipino, no Filipinos allowed image?
so that was during the 30s. It actually isn't a door. Most people thought it was a door because a lot of the reproductions are small or not clear. What it is actually a sign on one of the steps. So when you open the door, you'll see this sign. It's posted on one of the steps going up on the second floor. It wasn't really posted in front of the door, you know. So that's actually giving another layer of meaning, which is probably that we are not allowed to go up, you know, and succeed. You know, we're not allowed to. But then, you know, that's another interpretation. But the history was that during the 30s, a lot of Filipinos became a target because, especially in Stockton, because a lot of them go there when they don't have work. You know, that's where they live. That's where they live to live, not live to work. And they choose to go there to socialize with the local women. You know, they dress up into the nines, you know, Macintosh suits, and go, you know, spend all their money for the entire year in a dance hall, on a girl, and you know, it's a place for them to spend their money and be and feel like a human being, you know. But there's a resistance in the local population by segregating them from the whites. So they have to put signs up specifically for Filipinos because they're the ones that's being targeted. No other culture. That became the Filipino town of the 1930s. Was Stockton. Stockton became the main hub. You know, when they're off season and working throughout California, everybody goes to Stockton, or at least about 80% of them, right? So that's why.
So what can you say about the recent like anti-Asian sentiment in the U.S.?
Well, again, you know, when there's what I feel about that is that America has this false concept of being invincible and being wide and being kind of sort of like expansive, you know, like everything's here, everything's to the, you know, Hollywood like gives you that idea that everything's big, everybody can succeed if they want to. But then because of that, people who have self-pity or have some kind of mental illness, they have some kind of minimizing mentality. They minimize themselves, that they want to feel big by pulling other people down, you know, and what they blame their own faults to immigrants, especially Asians, which is for them the most foreign of all foreigners, because it's for them we are the extreme of the black and white American, you know. For Asians are like the extreme alien for America. That's why we become a target and we become dehumanized. All they know is that we are they. For them, we are the them, you know, the other. And they cannot identify with us because they don't know anything, or they don't know much about our stories. And that's why we're not seen as human beings. We're just seen as foreigners that's taking away their jobs, taking away their income, you know, making them feel minimized when they should not be that way because they're in America. There's an automatic, I want to call it, expectation that they should be successful, that they should be better than any other, especially foreigners. Foreigners should never be better than them, and they have this idea that foreigners are much more successful here than they are, and that foreigner for them are Asians, you know. So Asians become a target. So that hatred, which is, you know, basically racism is ignorance and hate combined, right? You're ignorant, you're hateful, because you are hate. It's the same. It's what it reflects back on you, on the on you hate yourself, and you don't know much about yourself. That's why uh, you also project that to other people.
Um, Tell me a little bit about what you know of Carlos Bulosan's work with the Four Freedoms, especially the freedom from want.
Okay, what I know about that was that when FDR,
Roosevelt.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt made this speech to get Americans to contribute to the war bond, the war effort. Um, a part of his speech was to emphasize on the four freedoms, and it became iconic. It caught the imagination of the American people that they used that to drive the you know the fundraising effort to help the war, to help the soldiers. And so um, Saturday Evening Post capitalized on it, and they had their editors choose four essayists who are most likely to come up with the uh, the the text that will justify the image or the idea of one of the four freedoms, right? And at the time, Bulosan was very much widely read, and he seems to be the perfect essayist for the freedom from want, some coming from a people that Americans are also supporting, you know, during the war effort in World War, you know, the war in the Philippines with Japan. So it kind of covered that part, that aspect of the whole European, Asian, you know, World War II narrative. So it kind of covers that, you know, in terms of the country, the continent, and then him being a minority, you know, a person of color, and his writings touching on the subject. I feel that's what gave him an advantage in being selected. So of course their star artist is the main event. You know, the paintings that Norman Rockwell was commissioned to do are the main event. But you know, to be able to write a text accompanying the image is meant to equalize, for the text to be equal to the image. So that, for me, that's the main, that's like a high achievement for Carlos Bulosan and Filipinos, because he is our voice. He gave us a stage, a platform for our stories, you know. And so we are part of that narrative. We are part of that piece of America during a time when America was its as they said, when they produced their greatest generation was World War II. So he was part of that greatest generation, and he was able to represent us in art. And what better than that, right? I would say that would be the equivalent to the Spoliarium of Juan Luna during the Spanish period, when he was able to elevate our story into art. I mean, a lot of people don't get it, right? Because the painting is Italian, right? I mean, it's Roman. But if you really look at the painting of Juan Luna, I have to go back to that too, because that's really how this whole thing started. I mean, my inspiration is Rizal, but then Rizal's inspiration was Luna's Spoliarium. It all started with Juan Luna's Spoliarium. And just to point out that art is where the Filipino identity started. It's art, you know. It's the Spoliarium. So what I'm talking about is that in the painting that Juan Luna did, it shows the theme of the gladiators being dragged into underneath the Colosseum, and it's being dragged into a pile of dead bodies. You see two dead bodies being being pulled with a string, and then you see a trail of blood all the way out to the canvas. But then, if you know, when you see the painting, that is the thing that kind of shocks you right away. Is the dead bodies, you know, with their grotesque, you know, mutilated and bloodied warrior, you know, physiques. But then, if you look at the background, most of the people are looking at the other side. You know, they're not looking at what we're looking at. They're looking at what's coming next. So it makes you think what could be much more grotesque than what's in front of us. See, that's where the art is. What is gonna come next? That's us. So whatever it is that comes into your mind that is more grotesque than what you're seeing, that's the Philippines. That is the message of our work. See, the main event is beyond the canvas. That's how art works. It's not an illustration. What you see is not what the Philippines is. It's what's coming next, and it's much more grotesque than that. So see how powerful that is. You know, it's like it's in the imagination. You create it yourself, and the artist or the author of the narrative is not telling you what to think because you are your own artist, right? And it's much more powerful that way. That's what the No Limitangere was all about. And in Rizal's No Limitangere, in chapter 8, called Recuerdos, it's probably the shortest chapter in the entire novel. It's probably like 5 pages, right? So you know that he was writing this in transit. He's not writing it in like one sitting. He would write it in different places, and you know, probably one sitting, one of them probably like 1 week or whatever. But in that chapter 8, for me, it connects it with art. He called it recuerdos, and recuerdos in Spanish means memory and souvenirs, right? It doesn't just mean memories, it also means souvenirs. So there is a memory connected to objects, right? There's a story that makes objects come alive through their story, through their stories. So the scene in the novel was that the main protagonist, which was Ibarra, Crisostomo Ibarra, returns from Europe after like more than a decade of completing his studies, and then he was shocked to find Manila the same as he saw it. He left it 10 years ago. And then, you know, riding a Karamata, he was brought in front of the botanical gardens of Intramuros, and suddenly something amazing happened. And he was brought into some kind of inverted telescope where Europe and Manila converged into an inverted telescope, and from that, different things. It became a charged space where the imagination just came alive and things looked differently, you know. And he had some kind of vertigo experience. He calls this, he calls it the specter of comparisons. The specter of comparisons, or the ghosts of comparisons, or the devils of comparisons. So what he's trying to say is that this is the space we need to create to progress. We have to put the public, the reader or your viewer, into that charged space where your imagination is activated and new things come out. And and that's what art does. So that's what I tried to do in the mural. I brought in 2 different worlds converging into one. Filipino American, and then Philippines converging into one, into a kind of shifting space, which is what Rizal called the specter of comparison. So that's chapter 8. And it again, it goes back to the No Limitang, José Rizal, Juan Luna's Spoliarium, which won the gold medal in Spain, and brought us, or at least our stories, into the world stage, and made it the protagonist or the main event of the global narrative at the time. And eventually the book and the painting made the Filipino story play a world role, right? We were the first Asian republic, the first to launch a revolution in Asia. So that's the kind of thing we have to aspire for. That's why we have to bring it back, because we want to go back to that place where we could play a world role, and our stories become a protagonist and transform everybody. And that's what we're trying to do here in Filipino Town, because we did that already. Our ancestors did that. and that means we could do it again. If only we could produce Filipinos again. The unfortunate thing is we have a country that produces Americans. I mean, recently I came back and relocated to the Philippines, and I was so stunned that I was searching for Filipino toys, you know. So I thought I would find them in the Sunshine Mall, which is like the poor people's mall, because the other mall is SM Bikutan, you know, in Parañaque. And I was stunned. The whole toy store doesn't have anything Filipino in it. Even the cheap plastic dolls or Barbie, there's no Filipino Barbie doll, or the animals. There's no carabao or chicken, or they're all like giraffes and elephants and tigers. And like, what, you know? There's nothing. I mean, I cannot buy a toy for my kid that's actually existing in their own country. I mean, there's something wrong there, right? I mean, and I mean, it looks very probably for Filipinos, they're like, oh, you're being idealistic, you know. You can't make everything Filipino. I mean, but what does that do to the kid, right? It makes them want to go somewhere else. It makes them not like where they are, and the things they see are not alive. They're not coming alive. They cannot play with it. They cannot make it tell stories. They cannot use a carabao to tell a story. They cannot use a Filipino eagle to tell their story. They have to use a giraffe that's nowhere except for the zoo. You know, I mean, and the dolls are all white. I mean that's really crazy. There's something wrong there. We have to change a lot, and for us to change a lot, we have to know who we are. We have to know what made us Filipinos, so that we know what we have to recreate to go back to that time when we created the Philippines. And looking back, I tell you, it's art that made us Filipinos.
Can you talk about the gateway and its significance?
Okay, so the gateway. The gateway is significant because it is the first for a Filipino town. You know, it's like, think about the earliest Chinatown. That's in the Philippines. You know, Binondo. Imagine that gateway that was built for that. That is the equivalent of what we did here in LA. You know, and that was during the Spanish period. You know, the gateway there was there. There was a gateway there since the Spanish period, and then it took us, you know, how many years in America? Since, let's say, 1906, more than 100 years before we have a gateway for a Filipino town. I mean, we have gateways probably like a marker, but not an entire arch, right? This is the first one that's an entire arch for a Filipino town, so it's significant on that sense alone. The second significance of that gateway is that the architecture that we reflect on that gateway is probably the same architecture Magellan saw when he first came to Cebu in 1521. I mean, he knew that God was present already in the Philippines. That's why he came there respecting the king and forging an alliance with the king of Cebu, right? He forged an alliance because God is really present everywhere. The only difference is that Magellan introduced the name of God and the story of God, you know, in a human form, which is Jesus Christ. But our ancestors already were bridging God to the world through the art, you know, and the palatial structures that he saw is probably what he saw, and that's what I try to recreate in the gateway, is what he probably saw, because 500 years, exactly 500 years before we built this, was the cross. Magellan planting a cross. And you know, when he planted the cross, he wasn't planning to plant a cross in the Philippines. He wasn't planning to go to the Philippines. He came to the Philippines because he felt blessed by the Philippines. He went there on detour in the Philippines. Just like the significance personally for me is because I'm also here on detour, right? I only stayed behind because I felt like I was challenged by my art school classmates and teachers of telling me that the only way I could make Filipino, them convinced that I'm painting about Filipinos or Filipino art, is if I portray them as houseboys or maids. Technically, what they're saying is that there's no such thing as Filipino art. You know, that's what they're telling me. I cannot, and so I was challenged. I stayed behind longer, trying to challenge that. To counter that, and that led me to the mural. The mural led me to, one project after the other until the gateway came along. So all of this is on detour because I've never wanted to stay in the United States. That's why I came back right after the gateway was installed. I already was seeing the plans, and I made that move last year so that I'm back in the Philippines. So anyway, but what happened to Magellan was their main goal was to go to the Spice Islands, which is Borneo in Indonesia, and at the Ladrones Islands, their whole fleet was robbed by pirates of their supplies, their food. So they ran out of food. They were already like eating like rat meat, and no water and anything until they found Samar. When they went to Samar, the Filipinos welcomed them. They fed them, and you know why? If you know the story of Malakas at Maganda, Malakas at Maganda's story says that the white people were children of Malakas at Maganda who left and never came back. So when they saw them, it was a homecoming. It wasn't like they were just arriving for the first time, but they saw them as equals and brothers, the children that came from Malakas at Maganda, and they welcomed them. In fact, the mass was seen as a blood compact. It wasn't seen as a conversion to Christianity. That's why King of Cebu was bold enough to ask Magellan to align with them in fighting Lapu-Lapu. They thought that they they saw the mass. When they explained blood of Christ, and drinking them in the cup, that was the same as a blood compact. They thought that was their version of the blood compact. So when Magellan arrived in the Philippines, we were already equals to the West. It's my point, right? And 500 years ago, that's how we were seen, and that's how we should see ourselves today. But we don't see ourselves like that. We see our pre-colonial past as never equal to anything that the West ever brought us. So we answer to them 500 years later that here we go, the gateway. This is what Magellan saw. We were equals. Yeah, that's the pre-colonial Kingdom of Cebu right in front of you, right? So that is the brown face of God in the Philippines, here in American soil, in the West. So that is the significance of the gateway, right? Magellan planning across, 500 years later we plant a pre-colonial palace in America, to show the face of God in the Philippines. There's always God in the Philippines, but we haven't put a brown face on him. Can we even imagine Mary being brown? We see all these miracles of Mary appearing in Japan, Korea, Vietnam. There's like all these appearances that are verified by the Vatican. Even the Virgin of Guadalupe, they always appear in the culture. They validate the culture that she appears in. She doesn't appear as white to any of these. Even in Europe, it's European. It's not American white. Or it's always God always does that, and we don't have that concept that Mary is a brown, holy figure. It's always gonna be white. And so these are the things that.
Can you talk about the palaces?
Okay, the palaces,
so the gateway is a palace.
Yes, the gateway is a palace. Okay, so before this, most of us think that the Filipino architecture is a bahay kubo. And what is a bahay kubo? It's a basket. A bahay kubo is a basket. First of all, the name kubo is cube. For you to build a basket, it has to be a cube, right? It has to be equal. And then you put a lid, and it's solid, but it's temporary. It's built for commoners. So it's not really a house. It's a shelter. It's a temporary shelter, and it should not be Philippine architecture. So that's the problem. We can't use that. But that was what was taught to us as students in the Philippines, because it's part of the Americanization of the Philippines. They want to teach us something minimized, that minimizes us. You know, the other architecture is the shipbuilding tradition architecture. It comes from the shipbuilding tradition. What is a shipbuilding tradition? It doesn't have any nails, made of wood, and they fit it all together as one huge vessel to carry thousands of people. This is the Karakoa, the Barang, the Balangay, and that's how the palaces were built. They recreate those ships on land. That's why even if they lift it up on stilts and create this massive structure, they recreate the main elements of the boat, which is the naga, which is usually on the hull. They put a naga on the hull like the Torogan. There's probably different versions of it. Only the Torogan preserved it, but they put that because it honors the guide of the seafarers and in the sea to find them safe passage in the oceans. These are the naga, sea serpents. So those are the prow, and in the gateway it's there. It's coming out, holding the lamp. Because they're the guide on the sea. And then on the top, on the mast of the ship, they put birds because that's the guide for them when they're out in the sea. When they see a bird, they know that that's the safe passage wherever their direction is, because the birds know where the storm is or where it's coming, or they're going away from the storm, and then they're going to land, right? And so once they see bird, they say, "Oh, I'm home. I know where to go, and I know where that it's close." Because wherever you see a bird, it's near land already. So it's a symbol that, it's a guide again. So they honor those naga and sari manok and create a motif and put them on the rooftop. Sometimes it's the naga on the rooftop. Sometimes, most of the time, it's the sari manok. So that's what we try to recreate there, because that's what the palaces are. Because it also it honors their tradition as seafarers, but it also honors their deities, because those are not just creatures; they're mythological beings that determines the universe. The movement of the universe. So actually, they're the guardians, right? The guardian of the sun and the moon is the sari manok. The guardian of the waters is the naga. So they determine the planting season and they determine the harvest season. It's also connected with the harvest and the planting season, because that's really what our ancestors were. They were revolving around the agricultural cycle, right? So that's basically the gateway. But of course, included the Spanish parts to honor the golden age during the time Rizal emerged. Because for me, the second golden age was the time when José Rizal, Juan Luna, and that generation came out of the country and created the Philippines. So to honor them, there's like this design on the holding up the central panel and the pillars. It's like some kind of floral motif. It's actually a replica of the ceiling mural of the Cuerma house in Vigan. It's the oldest preserved Filipino house that reflects 18th century Philippines. The reason why I chose 18th century is because America became a country during the 18th century, and Filipino Americans produced the first Filipino American art in the 18th century. And what is that? Those are the houses on stilts in Louisiana, which is also in the mural. The houses on stilts, and those are not bahay kubo, because first of all, they're not cube. They're built with wood, and they're massive, and they're without nails. They're built without nails, and they're on stilts. And in fact, those are the first architecture in the United States with stilts or piers, and they call that pilote architecture. So we actually introduced pilote architecture to America. That is a Filipino American art that was introduced to the United States. We were the first one to build that. It's Southeast Asian, but of course it's Filipino. Since we were the first to build it, that's our contribution. So I'm honoring that 18th century architecture by including that ceiling mural from Koema House.
So, Eliseo, you're going to Seattle soon.
Yeah.
Um, can you tell a little bit about Carlos Bulosan in Seattle
Okay, Carlos Bulosan started his political life when he first saw this rally from the 12th Street Bridge. I think that's what they call it. It's now called the Rizal Bridge. It's very It's like a coincidence that it was in that bridge that he first saw a street protest, some kind of labor protest, um, labor issues protest, and from that bridge, the same bridge is now called the José Rizal Bridge, right? So that bridge is significant because where Jose, when the new Bulosan the young Bulosan just coming from the Philippines starts his awareness of some kind of political activism in Seattle, in the streets of Seattle. For me, is iconic, and that's why in my latest mural I recreated that. I have him look down at the bridge, but his hand outstretched, and bringing up that street protest, trying to get that part of the image coming into his hand, but then his hands are segmented. I did that because there's actually several figures in the mural that I did in Seattle recently. The one I did recently had segmented bodies because for me, as a migrant, because they're all Bulosan was a migrant, right? He came from the Philippines, he grew up there, and he came here as an immigrant. And I am the same thing, but I feel like I'm caught between two worlds. There's two worlds that simultaneously exist in my mind, in my heart. Even though I live here, part of me is in the Philippines. And that's the same thing with all migrants. I think that's the same with Bulosan. That's why it's best to show them with segmented bodies, and also the idea of sacrifice, going through pain and fear and sacrifice and being discriminated upon. So the first project I did was in 1999, and it was for the Carlos Bulosan Memorial Exhibit. So they had funding to put a permanent exhibit of photographs, artifacts, his personal belongings, his clothes, his hat, his typewriter, in the lobby of the Eastern Hotel. The Eastern Hotel was one of the hotels everyone believed that he stayed in, and I was commissioned to do the centerpiece mural for the lobby. So it was a great honor for me to do that because it was a national competition, and actually the second attempt, because the first attempt they weren't able to find the artist. When they had a second attempt to have a call for art, then I was able to know about it. 3 people emailed me to compete, to send my application, and I got it. So I really tried to equal what I did here, but there's no way I could. But I felt like I did give it justice by really creating a mural that's also a miniature painting, because I did like a lot of really small images that recreates stories from the novel America's in the Heart, and so it's both a mural and a miniature painting, but in the scale of an 8 by 9 foot canvas. And so it's called Can You Read the Secrets of History in My Face? So the whole thing looks like his face, from his eye to his forehead from afar. So when you peek from the window on the street, you'll see like a man peeking back at you, but a giant one, and you could tell it's Bulosan's face. And if you look at the pupil of the eye of the mural, you can see what he's seeing. There's like dead bodies of Filipino laborers on the street, and cops beating down on the ground, and one cop about to hit him in his face. So that's what you see, when you see the mural in front of you. So I meant it to be interactive, and also tell a story and also have it shifting in imagery, because you see something different from afar. You see his face, but then you go closer, you see the stories. So that's what I did there. The second one is kind of like the equivalent of this in Seattle. There's 4 panels. Each panel has like one like part of the history. So the first 2 panels about Philippine history, from pre-colonial kingdoms, the Kingdom of Butuan, and the Intramuros, all the way to people power. So the same as this. And then the other side is from the landing of the 7 Luzon Indians. So that's the first mural that has an image of the Filipinos landing in Morro Bay, because there's no image of it, right? So I came up with a imaginary scene of how it would have looked like. So it's in that mural, because that's one of the things that murals attempt to do, is to tell stories that's not in history books. So before it becomes part of history books, it's usually in a mural. That's what happened here. That's why it became significant, is because this is the first mural ever with Filipinos as part of the Grape Strike. There hasn't been any mural with the Grape Strike that has Filipino bodies and faces in it. This is the first one. So that's why it became significant. And in that mural, I tried to do the same thing. I tried to put in images that don't have visual representation before. For example, if I ask you, what is the most significant event in Philippine history, what would that be? I could ask a question, right? Yeah. What would that be?
Sure.
Can you just like throw something out, What would be the most significant event? Okay, to make it easier, what is the most significant event in American history? What is the most significant?
American Revolution.
Well, there's one more event important than that.
What is it?
Independence Day. Okay, so see, this is Independence Day. Most people think Independence Day is one event where they separate from the power in England, but July 4th is not Independence Day literally, right? Because they lost several battles the same year they signed a Declaration of Independence. They were actually almost going to be defeated. It took another 8 years before they were actually free from England, right? So what is Independence Day? Independence Day is the day the natives, or whoever is represented in the document, tell the world that we are going to Americanize, localize, nativize the country. That America is for Americans, the Philippines is for the Philippines. The Filipinization movement of the Philippines is Independence Day. That's what I'm trying to say. The Americanization movement of America is Independence Day. It's the Americanization of the United States. They're saying that America is for Americans only, not for England, but for Americans. And we don't want to tell other people's stories in their behalf, or we don't want to tell our stories. We don't want them to tell our stories in our behalf, right? We want us to tell our stories on our behalf. That is Independence Day. That is the most important day in any country's history. So ours is Independence Day. But where is the image of the 177 Filipinos signing that document that says to the world that we want a country for ourselves? We are going to Philippinize the Philippines. To heck with Spain, to heck with the king, to heck with the queen. We are creating our own country. We're creating our flag. We're creating our anthem. We're going to unite behind this. This is our country. That is the most important event in Philippine history, Independence Day. But why is it not important? Why does it have the same importance as Independence Day in the U.S.? First of all, where do we celebrate it? Behind the flag in front of Rizal Monument. That is where America recognized Philippine independence. But that is only giving value to America's recognition of Philippine independence. So it's not really Independence Day, right? The real Independence Day is in Cavite, where our ancestors signed the document telling the world that we want the Philippines Philippinized. We want Filipinos to rule this country. This is our flag, this is our anthem, this is our name, right? It's the birthday of the country. That is the most important event. So in the Seattle mural, I created that image. 177 Filipinos signing the document. One of them is my grand uncle, my great grandfather's son. So it's the brother of my grandfather. It's the brother. It's a half brother. You know, it's very complicated, but I'm descendant from that signer, and so that mural is significant in that way because there's three things in that mural that I did that is the first of its kind. You know, the kingdom. We never had an image of an entire kingdom, right? What does it look like? What does Kingdom of Cebu look like, right? There's no image of that. Usually we show like lapu-lapu or soldiers in the boats or in the sea, but there's no background. Where is that? What does the houses look like? There isn't anything like that. And like, you know, if you look at Diego Rivera's murals, you can see the entire kingdom of the Aztecs with the pyramids, right? We don't have anything like that. So we need more images like that. That is our story, but we don't have it. All we have are stories of other countries' victory over us, or something like that, you know, and we don't even have an image of the why, you know, the first landing of Filipinos in America, or the signing of the Declaration of Independence, you know. So those are the things I try to do in Seattle, right? And with Carlos Bulosan, you know, being my first one, the second one, I showed him in that instance where Rizal Bridge connected with his own Rizalian campaign in the United States. He continued, he bridged the revolution of the Philippines in the United States, and it came to come alive through the farm workers movement, you know, and so I showed that, and I also showed in that mural that everything started with a martyr in America, which is Fermin Tabora, who was the martyr of the Watsonville riots. Because before the Watsonville riots, there wasn't any large-scale unionizing of Filipino laborers. It only came after Exeter incident and then Watsonville riots, and then after that, it became widespread. You know, it's like a revolution. You know, we have a martyr, we have a revolution, and then it triumphed in the Coachella Valley. We have to include the Coachella Valley. That's what I did also in Seattle. The Coachella Valley strike is phase one, but you know the Mexicans wouldn't include that. You know, because Cesar Chavez wasn't part of that. You know, but that's really the story. The martyr in Watsonville, and then Coachella Valley strike, and then the Delano Grape Strike. That is the Filipino American story, but rarely are we told in that kind of way. The one that there's a recent PBS documentary, Asian Americans. They featured Filipinos twice. One was an Igorot displayed in the World's Fair, and a descendant talked about that ancestor. And then later into the series, they showed Larry Itliong kind of like just coming out of nowhere, you know, as a hero. It didn't tell his story, how it came to that movement. So it looks like an individualized tokenism, you know? Unlike the other stories of the Koreans, the Chinese, the Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, yeah. They have an entire narrative from the first part of the series to the end, where there's a martyr, and then there's a movement, and then you have the culmination. With us, it's like a token, you know, but we really have that whole, like, you know, that whole narrative that starts from the 30s and ends in the 60s. You know, we have to have that kind of clarity, you know, who we are, and what we did and what happened. And I think that's what's happening when I do murals, because I have to see this visually, and I have to think about it in terms of like what happened during that time. Just like when I did this design for the mural, I tried to imagine how were the Filipinos received when they first came out into the public stage, right? If they saw Filipinos, oh, look at them, who are they? Like, what is their story? I mean, are they just Chinese, or are they just Mexican, or, you know, it's like It's like that. That's why they call the Filipino part of Delano Chinatown, even though there's no Chinese in there. It's all Filipinos living there. It's because they don't have an idea what the Filipino story is. Why? Because there's no art. There's no art connected with the story. And until we elevate our stories to art, we're objects. We're objects without a story. So that's why Filipino town in a way is like that. Historic Filipino town means we're historic. What does historic means? It's no longer a story, right? If it's part of history, it's no longer a story. It's already shelved. It's an archive. It's no longer alive. It's an object, right? It's not current. If it's history, it's not current. It's not a so in a way we're objectified in historic Filipino town, but we're countering that. It's a challenge for us to tell the story and make it into art. That is what the gateway is about, and to recognize the brown face of God exists, the Filipino face of God exists, and we bring that here because that part of the world within the archipelago of the Philippines has God's presence in it, and we have to bring that over here. We have to bring that presence here and tell that story because it's unique. It has a unique story. It has a unique. It has a unique if it has unique stories to tell, it has unique lessons to tell, and people will learn from that. And we owe the world that. The world, we owe that to the world to tell that story and to tell the lessons we learned. Because without that story, like what say, if you talk about the Grape Strike without Filipinos in it, it's not really the story of the Grape Strike, right? The Grape Strike without Larry Itliong is not the story. So
talking about stories, Eliseo, when was your first encounter with America is in the Heart? We talk about that book.
I think in the Philippines we read about parts of Bulosan's writings. I've seen his name. I'm familiar with his name even in the Philippines, and I know about the book even in the Philippines. But I never really read about it because, for me, it's like it's very unfamiliar territory. Especially for high school kid who see it in the library. So that's the most I could remember in terms of engagement with Bulosan. Only when I started attending, events in LA that has to do with Filipino American history, especially when I got in touch with the Filipino Library. That's when I learned about Carlos Bulosan and how significant he was. I would say it's through Helen Brown and Uncle Roy that I was introduced to Carlos Bulosan. And being surrounded by Helen Brown's library for me is the game changer. I would say that this whole mural is Helen Brown library. I wouldn't have been able to create this mural without Helen Brown's library. I mean, imagine me being like a teenager, only barely 5 years in America. I came here 17-year-old, designed this as a 22-year-old, but by the time I painted it, I was already 23, right? So between 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 5 years. 5 years in America, I was already designing this, and I already knew Bulosan needs to be highlighted. So if you notice in the mural, he's not supposed to be where he is. I mean, I put him where Pancho Villa should be, because basically Bulosan should be somewhere near the 40s era, right? Because that's when he published the book during the after the war, but around the 40s and 50s. But if you look at the mural, he's right next to the Olvera Street gazebo, or the first Filipino. So I made him the first Filipino American in LA, even though physically the first Filipino American on record is Antonio Miranda Rodriguez and his daughter. Bulosan is the one who gave us the identity as Filipino Americans because he identified as Filipino American. Even though I know this for a fact that, like me, he never changed his citizenship because they had this option after World War II when we became an America, when we became independent, for the locals in America to apply for U.S. citizenship. You know, he didn't. He because automatically, if you're here, from being a national, if you don't change your citizenship, you are Filipino. So Bulosan died as a Filipino citizen, even though he's a Filipino American icon. So that, in a way, for me, I connect with him in that way. I came here 17-year-old. I identified with Rizal and Juan Luna's, value for art and using that as a weapon or a tool, right? And then for Carlos Bulosan, keeping his citizenship. He never became an American citizen. So I'm the same. I could not even consider being what do you call it, dual. I can't even do that. So okay, so that's basically it. That's how I came across Carlos Bulosan, is through the the mural. Okay, sorry. Basically, I made him go further back before Pancho Villa because he's the one telling the story. He's the one telling the story, and I put him right here in front of this, learning circle, because he's the one telling the story, and it's about our stories. It's about valuing our stories. This is what everything's all about, and this is what Rizal taught us. And that's what we need to do, is to make our stories the main event, and value it enough to make it into art. That's why he's not where he's supposed to be. So in the same way that it looks like in the mural that Philip Veracruz is the most important figure because of his position in the mural, but if you look at it closely, he's behind Larry Itliong, and Larry Itliong is closer to the sun. His face is actually touching the sun, meaning he is the face of the sun, not Philip Veracruz. And above Larry Itliong is an angel, Filipino Babaylan, putting identifying him as the most significant figure in the mural by putting a lighted dish, presentation dish on top of his head to honor him as the most significant figure in the entire mural, even though it doesn't look like it. Literally, so there's this shift of meaning, where what you think it's Philip, but it's actually Larry, and here you think that Bulosan was here even before Pancho Villa, which is not the truth, but I did that symbolically because he is the first Filipino American, where Juan is like literally the first Filipino in LA. Through Antonio Miranda Rodriguez. Symbolically or metaphorically, it was Carlos Bulosan who is the first, with a human face, or Filipino American, identifies a human Filipino American. That's the same way that José Rizal was the first Filipino, because he was the first to identify as a Filipino when he made that speech during the toasting speech for the triumph of the Filipino artists. In 1884, he was selected to do the Brandis speech, or the toasting speech. He said that the triumph of our Filipino artists have rendered Spain and the Philippines equal states. Can you imagine saying that at 22 years old in 1884? He said that the Spain and Philippines are equal states. What that meant is that the motherland is no longer just Spain, but also the Philippines, right? He created a completely separate state just by the triumph of the Filipino artists. And it's through art that they were able to accomplish it. See how significant that is? That's why that is when the idea of Filipino in our history was born. And in a way, that was the Declaration of Independence by artists, and it's all because of our identity and our stories.
What's your message to the next generation of Filipinos and Filipino Americans?
Um, I would say that my message is just uh, learn about our pioneers, our ancestors in the Philippines, our pioneers here in America, and then find the best part of their achievements and accomplishments and build from that, because we have a lot that we could build from, and it's just a matter of what you could you could use to further their accomplishments, because unfortunately, you know um, very few value our stories, very few value our community. So it's like a Herculean task to identify all this separate, what do you call it, paths. They all created different paths, and I just found a path for art. And I found that, and I was able to work from it, and come up with something with it. But everybody else has their own has their own strengths, and for them to determine how they could further all of this, we will be much better, because it takes a village. It takes a village. It cannot be just one person. But we have to also question everything. We have to question and change the narrative, because where we are right now, which is basically living to work, not living to live, right? We're here to live. I mean, to work instead of live. It's because of the narrative that's been ingrained in our education, in our minds, and and for us to change that reality or situation, we have to change the narrative. That's what I've been doing, and that's probably how we accomplished all of this. That's how we were able to accomplish the gateway. Because I mean, at the end of the day, even though if we have money and a budget for a gateway or money for the mural, if we don't do it right, we don't do it on a high level, it's never gonna last. Imagine if this mural wasn't the whole wall, because the funding for this was just just the tall part of the mural, not the whole thing. And I sacrificed to paint the whole wall, even though it wasn't funded. Imagine if it was just part of it. This mural probably was be erased before they put a park here, or there probably won't be any park. This would have been a parking lot. There's all these things. So the message there is to try your best. If you believe in something, take it all the way to what you believe it should be. The same thing with the gateway. There was no money for the entire arch. All the designs you'll ever see that was produced, there's probably about 50 designs. None of them is the full arch. But as early as 2007, it's in the mural actually, I already had a premonition that we deserve a whole arch. And so when Jessica came along, she wouldn't have a time to come up with a competition, to come up with a new design. She just pulled out this design I came up with, because I believe we deserve it, and there we go. We have this gateway. I mean, even though we have the money, and if it was a bahay kubo gateway, it probably wouldn't have the support. It has to be done right. It has to be done well, and we just have to aspire for the best, because we deserve it.